هەروەک خۆتان دەزانن ئێستا کە عێراق لە وەزعێکی ئاڵۆزدایە باری سیاسی بەهۆی ئەو خۆپیشاندانانەی کە لە بەغدا و محافظاتی جنوبی دەستی پێکردیە بە شێوەیەکی گشتی تاسیری لەسەر بواری سیاسی و ئارامی و سکیوریتی کردووە و لێرەش ئەوڕۆکە لە دوێنێەوە دەست کە گوێمان لێ بووە لە چەندین کەسایەتی سیاسی و ئەکادیمی و باحثین کەەوە تاوتوێ ئەو بارودۆخە دەکەین ئەوڕۆکەش خۆشحاڵین بە ئامادەبوونی پەناڵێکی نێودەوڵەتی کە لە عێراق و لە بەغدا و لە کوردستانیش حزورێکی بەقووەتیان هەیە و یاریکەری سەرەچین لە بواری سیاسی لە عێراق و لە ناوچەکە بۆیە حەز دەکەین کەەوە ڕاو بۆ چوونی ئەوانیش بزانین و تێبگەین کە ئەوان چۆن دەڕواننا ئەو بارە ئاڵۆزەی ئێستا لە ئارادایە. لەبەرەوەی پەناڵەکەشمان هەمویان بە ئینگلیزین بۆیە من بە ئینگلیزی پەناڵەکە دەست پێ دەکەم و قسەکردن دەکەین. وەڵامەکیت هەموو لایەک جیهازی تەرجمە هەیە ئەگەر ئەوانەی کە ئینگلیزی نازانن. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm delighted to have a distinguished panel here of countries that are present in Iraq and obviously an international organization who are right in the center of the events in Baghdad and, as a matter of fact, been asked to play a lot more active role in what's taking place right now in general, that we will come to debate it. Obviously, Iraq is going through crisis, political and security, and we would like to discuss this and see the impact of that and the view of the international community as what is taking place. The style we're going to adopt here will be that we will have a brief debate here, then we would like more contribution from the audience. So feel free to raise your hands and contribute, but I have one thing to ask is please ask questions as much as you can rather than give us opinions that could take much longer. We want to pick their brains as much as we can, and this is a rare opportunity, so take full advantage of that. I would like to start with U.S. Ambassador Matt. Today in or maybe yesterday in Washington Post, Doug Olivan wrote, U.S. government appears to be acting timidly and backing the government rather than the protesters. And to contrast that, today you have issued a statement as a U.S. embassy where you are deploring violence used against the protesters and very much calling for dialogue, as if I understand it, and you are more or less condemning what's taking place. How do you see the protest and what's taking place, and what's your view as the United States taking part? If you can give us a brief view of your stance on that.
Thank you very much. Is the microphone working? Thank you very much, Farhad, ladies and gentlemen, and a thank you to the Middle East Research Institute and the organizers of this. It's a real pleasure to be here for this. Obviously, on the topic of the discussion, which is state building, I think that is a pertinent question, as you ask about the view that the United States takes of what is happening here in Iraq, what's happening in Lebanon, elsewhere. In terms of not just young people, but broad swaths of the population that feel that, in a sense, they don't have fully functioning states that are able to deliver. And of course, the protests in Baghdad, we all saw that there were very immediate and direct demands that began this with requests for jobs, a sense of resentment but it's morphed broadly into, I think, what is this larger question of whether people feel that they have fully functioning states that protect the country's sovereignty, states that have political leaders that act in the interest of the broader national agenda rather than a narrow domestic agenda based on ethnic or sectarian agenda, or in fact here in the Middle East, given the nature of the region, that in fact, where there is a history of countries that meddle or interfere in the politics of others in order to advance their own agendas, that what you need ultimately in order to be able to stand up against that is a state with institutions that prevent the type of corruption that many of the young people are complaining about, that produce political systems and leaders that have a statesman-like approach towards protecting sovereignty of the country, and then the type of institutions that deliver effectively the type of services that people demand. Of course, I'd take issue with a characterization of our response as being timid. You'd expect that. But it is, I think, realistically, a response that recognizes the complexities of Iraq as a nation and the complexities of what is happening here. And that, of course, first and foremost, our intention would be to do no harm. And that ultimately, since the United States' interests are so closely tied, not just in Iraq, but to this region broadly, to Iraq being a strong, stable, sovereign state, that the last thing we would want to do is to do anything that signals or in any way deprives the Iraqi people from their own chance to determine what that state is. We want an Iraq where Iraq's future, it's the type of state that it has, the government that it has, is determined by the Iraqi people. Anything other than an Iraqi determined state, in the long term, it runs counter to the U.S. interest in seeing the type of institutions that prevent those malign activities that we see as at the root cause of the current political crisis.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'll come back to you with a couple of points later on, but I'd like to go to Alice and ask her, the protesters and large, I would say, the political players demand, ask, request UN intervention, UN supervision, and even one of the leading political leaders asked for election with international supervision, and usually the international supervision is seen as UN supervision. How realistic really are these demands for UN to supervise elections if it happens, and how do you see the characteristics of the election law, and your contribution as the United Nations mission here in Iraq?
That's a very interesting question. You mentioned the elections. There's also, we saw last night, the call for the United Nations to get engaged on the constitutional review that is ongoing. And we've heard people call on us from many sides to comment on what is happening in terms of human rights. You may have seen we issued our second report last night from our Human Rights Office on what has been going on in the protests. I think it's very important. I'll take you back, if I may, to the basis on which the United Nations is here in Iraq. As you know, we have a mandate which is renewed each year. It's a mandate under Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, which means that we are here at the request of the Iraqi government. We're here with a mandate that we receive from the United Nations Security Council, and that mandate is to advise and assist and support activities going on here in Iraq. And that might be giving policy advice to the government, that might be helping the Electoral Commission to run elections, that might be monitoring human rights, it might be promoting gender parity, all sorts of activities, but in a supportive and ancillary role. We don't make executive decisions. So if we look at some of the demands that have been made of us in recent days, there are, of course, many things we can do if we're asked to engage, but there are things that we can't do as well, because we have this very specific role. And our mandate, as I say, is agreed in advance with the government and endorsed by the Security Council. And our role really is to draw on all that expertise and experience that the United Nations has from its engagement in many countries over the world, around the world over past years, and to give our best advice. And that, in the current circumstances, might, for example, mean helping to devise and implement the institutional changes necessary to address the demands that have been raised by the protesters. And already we're engaging with all the key players here, including the demonstrators, the government, civil society. We've as you know, offered our good offices in building a dialogue, a national dialogue. But the decision-taking process will rest. The decision-taking process will rest with Iraqi institutions. The decision-taking process is not us. So to give a specific example, we've been asked to help draft the electoral legislation that might lead to elections. As you know, the President has asked for early elections, and he's put together a committee of experts, and we are advising the committee of experts. That means we're outlining the advantages or disadvantages of the structures that the committee is considering. We're able to give examples of how electoral commissions work in other countries with which we've worked in the past. But our role is not to steer the committee in one direction or another. Our role is not to pilot the draft legislation as it goes through Parliament. If there are elections, we will be very happy to support whatever electoral body takes those elections forward. But we won't be supervising the elections, we will be advising on the elections. And to change our role would require a real change to our mandate. Similarly, with the constitutional review that is now going ahead, we'll be delighted to give advice and share our experiences with the body that will take forward the constitutional analysis. But we don't have an interest in steering it in one direction or another.
Great. Well, thank you for that. There are many points that I'd like to come back to you about that, but let me give Tradine a chance to, and I'd like to thank you for the short notice being here. And unfortunately, we had some logistical issues with Hansi Escobar, the Spanish ambassador, to be here, and I'm not sure why Bruno's not here, but and in any case, we have a fantastic replacement at a short notice, and I'd like to thank you for taking the challenge. Obviously, New Zealand is a country, to me, is known for the All Blacks and the rugby and the Kiwi. But nonetheless, you have an excellent presence, and you are here in Iraq, and you do trade and business with Iraq, and your active role in Baghdad also, and we thank you for that. How do you see the process of state building, and how you compare really a country like New Zealand with the resources they have? How could that reflect in Iraq, and in the light of what you see taking place? If you give us an overview of what you see from your end.
Thank you, Farhad. I think everyone in this room has a pretty good understanding of why the US and the United Nations are represented on this panel. And other than the absence of my colleagues here, you may not be so sure about why New Zealand has a place on this panel. Certainly in Baghdad, I am often met by surprise when people learn that there is a New Zealand embassy in Iraq. And I'm often asked, why? What's the relationship between the two countries? And I'll be honest, it has been over the last few years a somewhat limited relationship. It is one based on some of the security issues that have brought us here. New Zealand is more than 15,000 kilometres away from Iraq. We're a small country, 4.5 million people. The shockwaves from Iraq have reached our shores on many occasions in the last few decades. In the 1980s, when we had to close our embassy the first time during the Iran-Iraq War. In the 1990s, when we had many refugees arrive from this part of Iraq to New Zealand. And of course, in 2014, when New Zealanders watched in shock at the violence and brutality being committed against people in this country. New Zealand heeded the call of the UN and of our other friends in the region and around the world and joined the coalition to defeat ISIS, working alongside the Iraq government and the Iraqi security forces to deal with what was at the time an enormous challenge. We also upped our humanitarian efforts and our stabilisation efforts because it takes more than a military effort to defeat a terrorist enemy. But your question might be, what does this have to do with state building, and what does it have to do with the relationship between New Zealand and Iraq? Well, that was really answered for me in a really terrible way on the 15th of March this year, when New Zealand suffered a horrendous terrorist attack. 52 of our Muslim brothers and sisters were killed while in prayer, and it was shocking for my country. It was shocking for me. On that day, it was an incredibly upsetting day for me. In the middle of the day, I received a call from Foreign Minister Al-Hakim, and he said to me, and I hope he doesn't mind me repeating this because I didn't ask his permission, but he said, "New Zealand stood by us in our darkest days, and now we stand by you." You can imagine how that affected me. In the days that followed, I called on many religious and political leaders. My intention was to assure them that the Muslim community in New Zealand was safe, and that my community and that my government would do everything we could to keep them safe. Instead, in most of those meetings, those I was meeting with, they were reassuring me. They reassured me that New Zealand would recover from what we had gone through. What that shows to me about state building and the relationship between Iraq and New Zealand is that we genuinely are a community of nations. Regardless of distance and difference, when we need to, and when we do so with good intentions, we are able to come together to support each other in real challenge. Now, I bring us forward to the present day and what I am seeing in Baghdad. It's hard for someone like me, someone in New Zealand, to really fully understand what is going on. We spend a lot of time talking about it. We spend a lot of time with our local staff at the embassy trying to understand. What I know is that there is a large call from young people who want to see a different Iraq. Now, that's something I understand. For most of my career, the highlight of my career has been working with young people all around the world who have made that call and who have changed their countries. I've been posted in South Korea and in Indonesia. And there, the movement of young people who wanted political change, who wanted economic change, so they felt ownership over the country that they lived in. In Baghdad, one of the challenges that we have is our ability to engage with those young people. The security situation is such that it's not easy for me to engage in the way that I have in my previous postings. So we hear it second and third hand. Often we hear it through Farhad and his colleagues, through various forums. So we try and understand what it is that people want. And we try and think how we might help. One way we do that is through our engagement at the political level, by trying to convey as an international community how we think we can help, what we're seeing and what we're hearing, and why this matters to us. On the socio and economic side of things, where I see a future for New Zealand and Iraq is, as you say, in the economic sphere. New Zealand companies are intrepid. You may know we are known as Kiwis. Kiwis are an indigenous bird of New Zealand. It's a flightless bird. Yet despite that, New Zealand is spread out all over the world. And they take their business interests with them. They are present here in Iraq, but I have many more New Zealand companies that would love to do business in Iraq. They would love to support Iraq's young people in developing their economic opportunities, but so far are prevented from doing so. In my engagements with the government of Iraq, with political parties, I hear a lot about economic reform. I hear a lot about Iraq wants to attract foreign investment and trade. I hear a lot. I don't see as much action as I would like to. The international community, particularly the World Bank and the IMF, have a huge amount of support that they can provide. It includes experts from New Zealand, and we would like to do that. And we think there is a part for the international community, the UN, as we've heard from Alice, but from others as well, that will be part of this reform process if we are allowed to be part of it. And certainly that's the advice that I'm giving to New Zealand and to my government, is to say that this is where our future is, and this is where the future of Iraq is.
Great. Well, thank you for that, Tridine. Wonderful, and I'll come back to you about the aspect of the young people and some of the demands that we see from protesters and how you see it from your end. If I may come back to you, Matt, in your statement you say, we deplore the killing and kidnapping of unarmed protesters. On your Facebook, the embassy Facebook page, I saw a comment in Arabic, الشجب ما يوكلنا خبز شبابنا راحت فدوة, and the rough translation is deploring or it doesn't give us bread. And there is another comment which was in English. It says, you are always warning, worrying, deploring. And some observers, and I quote here, say the administration should empower a U.S. ambassador to forcefully coordinate U.S. policy. What is the U.S. policy for Iraq, and how you translate that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, of course, if I do go back to that underlying principle of seeking an Iraq that is a stable, strong, sovereign state with a fully functioning, capable government, we have particularly throughout this protest that began now more than a month ago, repeatedly stressed how important it is that in responding to this type of protest, that the government respect international norms of human rights, that in terms of indiscriminate killings, kidnappings, some of the things that deeply, deeply concerned Iraqis themselves in the first wave of protest, and even now in the second wave of protest, we see really unacceptable levels of deaths, and now increasingly I do sense that there are some activities going on that aren't under full control of the government or anybody else, but some protest leaders or figures or activists who are disappearing or who are receiving intimidation, extortion. Journalists, we know, of course, that are being threatened. This is the type of thing that, particularly for Iraq, as it continues now through this 16-year challenge of moving out of a post-conflict society into the type of prosperous, stable state that Iraqis themselves want, is exactly the wrong direction to go. Not only will it lose the critical international support upon which Iraq relies, but frankly, I think it also threatens the legitimacy and the connection that must exist between the people and the government, particularly of people that have endured so much. Really, if you look at Iraq, this is a history of decades where Iraq has experienced brutal oppression, civil war, conflict, more recently 4 years of what Daesh did to this country. And in this post-conflict society, as there are many, many well-intentioned people who are trying to move to something else, we have to recognize that there are going to be legacies of this past and this history, armed groups that exist outside the authority of the government. One of the things that I hear most often from Iraqi friends that is almost, in their minds, startling as they talk about the protesters is the absence of fear. Now, that's an interesting comment, I think, because for a certain generation of Iraqis, they grew up where the walls had ears, and that fear that permeated so much of the society. And it's startling, and I think a sense of awe of many towards these young people who don't have that sense of fear. And that, of course, is something that's precious. It must be preserved, but it could all be put in jeopardy if those who are perhaps arguing that these protesters or what they do represent the other, and somehow use of violence against them or silencing them or not giving them their place as Iraqi citizens within a sovereign Iraqi state. This is what concerns, I think, all of the friends of Iraq so deeply.
Thank you for that. Alice, in terms of UN mandate or the UNAMI mandate, I always see it as a double-edged sword. You could hide behind it, or you could use it to effective use, and I have seen it both. I must admit that the current UNAMI mission are doing a fantastic job. Yourself, Janine, have been very active from day one. Janine even took the courage to go to the protesters and ride a tuk-tuk and be among them, and she has issued in UNAMI's name several statements, including the report you mentioned yesterday that was issued that highlights what's taking place. As far as the election aspect is concerned, we know the presidency is working on a law and you have been engaged with them, but the expectation is much higher than what the mandate is. The people in the mind of the normal, ordinary people, they don't understand that language. They think you have a moral mandate before any legal mandate to take an active role and be part of the process and make sure that their rights are protected. At the end of the day, United Nations in its own, it was established to protect human rights. How do you see that mandate used in a way that is good for the state of Iraq?
We are definitely not hiding behind a mandate. I see the mandate as empowering us. And as I say, we get a new mandate each year and we pay a great deal of attention to what the mandate will look like. We make advice on which areas we think we can usefully contribute to. But as I say, at the core of this is the respect that we have for Iraq as a sovereign state, respect for a decision-making process, and also an understanding that unless Iraq itself and the people of Iraq own the decision-making processes, unless they own the change that they wish to see, it won't survive. It won't be sustainable or legitimate or credible. And I'm very keen, for example, at a personal level, we've been giving advice to this committee of experts that is looking at new electoral legislation. I would be very keen for a public consultation around that legislation. One of the things that concerned me very much during the national elections last year was the very low turnout, was the apathy that I felt. I spent a lot of time traveling around the country talking to people about the elections. The apathy, particularly among the younger generation, was extremely concerning, and we saw a very low turnout. I can think of two governorates where turnout was around 10%. That is a wholesale disengagement from the political process, the decision-making process, the ownership of their own country and their own future. And what we would like to do is help drive forward a process in which people feel invested. And I think that will be very important. I spent a lot of time talking to young people about getting engaged in politics. I think it's a tremendous waste of young people in their 20s that the threshold for becoming a professional politician, from being a member of parliament, a member of provincial council, was at 30 years old, dropped to 28. There's so much dynamism, so much activism among young people in this country. They are, of course, in the protests show this, they are engaging with the future of their country. And I'd like to think, we're trying to think about how that commitment and that enthusiasm and that belief in their country can be channeled into political reform that brings all of that energy into government as the driver of this country. And there's a technical side to running elections in which we always engage, but as you say, there's also a moral side to our engagement. We do what we believe to be right and best. We support those that we think are trying to do the best for their country. As you know, the SRSG, Janine has talked about a national dialogue. All that really means is a really good conversation for everybody who is interested to work together. And I think that will be very important. What we need to do is avoid a series of reforms that are taken as reactionary measures to address the legitimate demands of the protesters, but don't take account of the different views, that don't take account of all the ideas that are coming out. You've heard me on many occasions talk about gender issues. What that means to me is the fact that Iraq simply can't afford to ignore the 50% of its population that is female, because that 50% includes many motivated, talented, expert, experienced people, and all of them are needed. Everybody is needed. The challenges I see arising for this country are largely through having ignored the contributions of many people who could be steering it in the right direction. And at the end of the day, what our role is as the UN is to try and help those people to find their public voice.
Well, thank you for that, and clearly the role you play is most welcome. Tradin, if I come back to you, you mentioned the shock waves of what's happening have reached your shores, and that shows the international aspect and impact of any event, really, that in the global village that we live in. And you also mentioned jobs for the young people, and in Iraq, 60% of population is below the age of 30, and nearly 50% of them are unemployed or outside employment. And that the protesters also, when they started, the demands were really based on socio-economic demands before it moves on to become political. How do you see this, in your view, as to address this by the Iraqi government and the authorities, and how you compare it, and what advice would you give, if any, to address this issue?
Reform of any kind is difficult, and political reform is probably most difficult of all. You all know how hard won it is in Iraq today. Economic reform is also very difficult, but regardless of the political system you have in place, it's feasible. You can start today. That to me is really where a lot of effort should be being put, so that we can answer some of the demands of young people who, having gone into tertiary education, don't have the hope of a job at the end of it. I went to university as a really unusual case of knowing exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a diplomat, and I left university with exactly that job. But a very tiny percentage of New Zealanders are employed by the government in New Zealand, and that number gets smaller almost every year as government shrinks. It's really unusual to me to come to a place like Iraq and find out that the biggest employer in this country is the government. Young people are, by their nature, entrepreneurial. It doesn't matter where I go in the world. Young people aspire to do better and be self-made. There are many young, incredible entrepreneurs in Iraq. I've met a handful of them, and they deserve an opportunity. It's very hard to be entrepreneurial in a country that doesn't have a well-functioning banking system, for example. This is an area where I have continued to say there is support out there in the international community from the World Bank that would enable change to come relatively quickly. Not the massive reform that needs to happen, that will take time, but there are changes that can be made that will provide short-term economic opportunities for young people who are looking for them. You don't have to drive too far on the streets of Baghdad, and I'm sure it's the same here in Erbil, to see young people looking for economic opportunity and taking it where they find it. But really, for that to grow, you need to put infrastructure around it. And that infrastructure is really lacking. And I think that is something that really tomorrow, I know the international community, not just New Zealand, many other countries are standing by and willing to provide it. They just need to be asked, and then there needs to be a commitment from the government to carry that through. I think when it comes to, in the short term, and the employment issue that young people are looking for, I think the same issue that we've dealt with around the world, which is to say to our young people, you have to think broadly about what economic opportunities that you want, and adjust your education to that. Everyone I've spoken to in the last few days here in Erbil, but also in Baghdad, focuses on education. It is a big issue for this country, and one that it needs to be addressed. There are too many young people who are not getting an education. Too many young people who are currently displaced around Iraq, who are not getting the education opportunities that they need to thrive through adulthood. As an international community, we can support that, but there also has to be a commitment from the Iraqi community, from Iraqi people, that education is critical to the development of its young people. And I guess where the two come together for me is that until such time as you can address some of the basic needs and demands of young people, and education is the top of that list, economic opportunity comes from education, we will just continue to see a cycle of massive demonstration as young people go through, strive for something more, and find that they get to a certain point and that option's not available to them.
Thank you very much. Alice, if I come back to you. Yesterday there was a lot of talk, and there was a very high-level meeting here in Kurdistan about the constitution and the concerns they have in the demands in Baghdad about changing constitution. And in the light of that, how do you see the constitutional change, and how you see the Baghdad-Erbil relationship, the KRG relationship, in the light of this matter, in your point of view?
I think I'd like to sort of separate out the strands of what you're saying, because I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that the Baghdad-Erbil relationship, which is a very important one in a number of areas, I wouldn't like to see that overshadowed by the constitutional issues that are moving forward. I've been talking to many friends and partners here in the Kurdistan region about the constitutional changes. For me, it's quite interesting to come to this because I lived for 2 years in Basra, where they saw constitutional changes as a possibility for the south of Iraq to become more autonomous. So I lived for quite a while with the concept of constitutional changes as offering a number of opportunities for advance and empowerment. I very much understand the concerns voiced here in the Kurdistan region about possible changes to the constitution, not least because the dialogue so far on constitutional changes has been a dialogue around the potential threat to the special position of the Kurdistan region. To be honest, from where I sit in Baghdad, I'm not detecting an appetite, a general appetite for imposing constraints or reducing the autonomy of this region. What I'm hearing, of course, is the Basrawis saying, oh, I wonder if this is a chance for us to get something more out of the constitution. As everybody knows, since the last discussions around the constitution closed down in 2009, it's always been the fact that there is an intention to take up again a reflection on the constitution. I think the structures that are being set up for dialogue around that constitutional change, the body that's been set up, the very clear instructions that we heard yesterday about engaging with many sectors of the community, many professional experts. I'm encouraged by that. We've got a 4-month period in which I hope there will be exactly the kind of good, substantial national dialogue that we were talking about earlier. I would hope that it becomes clear that this is not something that the Kurdistan region should be worried about, because as I say, I think the sort of constitutional changes that people are looking for are not to take away from the Kurdistan region, but for wider opportunities for the country as a whole. we all know that some of the articles of the Constitution are extremely controversial and problematic, and there'll need to be a mature dialogue about that. But I never have a problem with the concept of initiating dialogue and having a discussion. I think that's always a good thing, as long as the discussion is open and inclusive. And it's the inclusivity that will give any decision that is taken at the end of this 4 months its credibility. Separately from that, I am very much encouraged to see the strength of the dialogue that exists between Baghdad and Erbil over the last 5 or 6 months. Slightly longer than that, but I'm sort of thinking in the recent past, there's been some real progress. I know that that's not just our view; it's the view of many people that we've spoken to. My concern, I think, at the moment is that I hope that the other challenges that Iraq is facing as a country don't impede or overshadow that very good dialogue that is ongoing. I think there are some sensible structures. There's a good agenda for discussion, and from where I sit, part of my time in Baghdad, I'm detecting a real appetite at the federal level to resolve quite a lot of the outstanding irritants between Baghdad and Erbil. I've had this conversation in various forms for the recent weeks, which is, although we need all of us to support addressing the demands of the protesters, addressing this very immediate and urgent crisis, we also need to have enough bandwidth that we're also encouraging and supporting the daily business that is going on here in Iraq, including that very important dialogue between Baghdad and Erbil.
Thank you for that. Matt, given we are in Kurdistan, I have to ask you about Syria. And yesterday, President Necirvan Barzani said that US didn't have policy in Syria. And clearly the Kurdish people for the first time felt really badly about what happened and what took place in terms of the US withdrawal of the troops. And some of the troops were brought to Erbil, as a matter of fact. And we saw some of the video footage, how they were treated on the way. What is the US policy in Syria, and how you see this? Is there any change, or will there be any different in the coming weeks and months, so to speak, as the suffering of the Syrian people, or the Kurdish in Syria, is growing, and we see the human rights issues and the refugees or the deportees from their land, even some of them crossing to Kurdistan region here?
Of course, I know that there is a widespread concern in the Iraqi Kurdistan region following the U.S. government's decision to withdraw some of our forces from northeastern Syria. And I've even heard some people question whether this portends some decline in U.S. commitment to the Iraqi Kurdish region, to Iraq, or to the Middle East as a whole. And I can assure you that that is not the case. The United States remains committed to Iraq, to this region, to protecting and defending, advancing our interest in this region. And I don't see those interests diminishing in any way, nor do I see our commitment to defending those interests diminishing. It's important to understand, of course, that there really is a fundamental difference in terms of the situation that we faced in Syria, have faced, and continue to face. It's 8 years now where the country has been torn apart. And of course, going back to my earlier remarks about the failures of governance in this region, Syria, of course, is one of the prime examples of that. And what has happened, of course, is there's been, over the last 8 years, the collapse of governance, fracturing of the country, and then we see all the consequences from that in terms of humanitarian suffering, degradation of norms of state behavior in terms of use of violence against civilians, tremendous flows of refugees from Syria that have destabilized not only neighboring countries, but of course have had tremendous impact as far away as Europe and in the United States. Faced with this in some respects, of course, and with the fact that ISIS emerging from Iraq and Syria, given weak states and institutions and failure of institutions, this was a threat to the international community, and the international community has responded. With the help of the Iraqi government, Iraqis, Kurdish Peshmerga, and others, we have, and of course in Syria with partners such as the Syrian Democratic Forces and others, we have managed to deliver significant blow to Daesh in terms of defeating the physical caliphate. But I think we all recognize that the ideology out of which that arisen has not been defeated. And in terms of conflict, you don't defeat your enemy unless your enemy feels defeated. And I think we all sense that that ideology is out there, certainly does not feel defeated, and is looking for opportunities to evolve. Now, in the case of Syria, because the United States believes so much that international order is based on sovereign states and respect for sovereignty of states, our relationships with partners in Syria were always partners of convenience, and it was always clear in our discussions with them that these were partnerships of convenience. And at the end of the day, a year ago, President Trump was already signaling that, and it wasn't really President Trump just speaking on himself, he was channeling a view of many, many Americans that the U.S. was in some respects bearing a burden that other countries were not stepping up and sharing and taking their part as well. And whether that was repatriating foreign fighters from different countries, or in fact being on the ground working with Syrians and others to do that. So that's the situation that we've faced in Syria. In Iraq, we have a very, very different situation. The coalition presence here, which of course is a coalition well headed by the United States, comprises more than 70, 80 countries. They're all countries that recognize that there's an interest in working together to prevent the resurgence of Daesh in Iraq and Syria. And so there's really a dual mission here, and it's not only a mission to focus on preventing the resurgence of Daesh, but also working with the Iraqi security forces and the Iraqi institutions of security so that that burden is ultimately shifted to where it belongs, to the Iraqi security institutions that are best placed to do that. Syria, because of the reality of what we have there, we don't have that opportunity yet, so we're facing a very, very different situation.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open up the floor for questions. حەزەکەم کەوا پرسیارەکان بە شێوەی پرسیار بی نەک مداخەلەی دوور و درێژ بۆ ئەوەی زۆرترین فرصەت بدەین بەوانەی کە دانەوێت قسە بکەن نەک دوو کەس و سێ کەس کاتێکی باشمان هەیە بۆیە حەز دەکەم کە زۆری ئەوانەی حەز دەکەن قسە بکەن دەست پێ بکەن عادەتەن ئەو دیوە دایمەن بەشی خورایە لۆیە بەو دیوە دەست پێ دەکەم جەنابتان یەکەم کەس کە لەو دیوەی ئاخر ئەوەی دوای دەمە لای جەنابت بەسەر چاو لە خزمەتدا
سەرەتا دەستان خۆش بێت ئەگەر دەرفەت بێ من پرسیارەکە بە ئینگلیزی دەکەم
فەرمووە بە ئینگلیزی عەرەبی کوردی هەموو یەکشتە.
Thank you very much for the comments of the panel. I've got a question for the US ambassador with regards to what is happening today on the streets of Baghdad and in Iraq. The call of the youth for reform and for services. My question here is the statement of US embassy with regards to the demonstrations, and also going back to the fact that these demonstrations are an accumulated anger of the youths over the past 15 years of misrule in Baghdad by leaders that governments also that the US continuously supported. So the question here is, we have a government for the first time that is looking to make some changes, but it's not supported. It's not supported by the political leaders and parties in Iraq. At the same time, we have political leaders who were at the core of corruption, who are asking for reform and change today, like Prime Minister Maliki before, ex-Prime Minister Maliki and Abadi. So the US, after 2003, has a direct responsibility to work to create stability in Iraq. The question here is, the Iraqi people are asking for services. Is constitutional change the answer to these services? Are they going to get their demands met in a change in the constitution, or will their demands be met through the support for a government that is ready and willing to provide assistance and services to the people and to tackle corruption?
زۆر سپاس. کاتەکەم وەکو برادەرەکەوە پرسیارەکان محدد بی و کەمترین کات بۆی زۆرترین پرسیار وەرگرین.
بەڵێ ئەو کاتتان باش. من کاوەمەر بەڕێوەبەری گشتی پرۆگرام چاپەمەنەکان لە وەزارەتی پەروەردە دەمەوێت لەسەر بابەتەکە قسە بکەم، مەسەڵەن هاوکاری نێودەوڵەتی بۆ دەوڵەتسازی. دەمەوێت ڕوونکردنەوەت بۆ بەڕێزانە بدەم بەرچاوڕوونیان هەبێتن لە عێراق و لە کوردستان دەوڵەتسازی دروست نابێتن لەبەر یەک هۆکارێک. لە هەموو یعنی وڵاتانی دنیا لە دوای نۆهەت تەتەوریان کرد، بەڵام عێراق و کوردستان بەهۆی ئابلۆقی ئابووری مثلەن بەغدا ئابلۆقی ئابووری لەسەر بوو کە ناوێن لێ نابوو ئابلۆقی ئابووری، بەڵام کوردستان دوو ئابلۆقی لەسەر بوو. ئێمە دابڕین لەو تەتەورات و کە لە دنیا ڕوویدا. من دەمەوێت ئەو بابەتە بە شێوەیەک بە نمونەک باسکەم لە سەر
نیو دقت بردیە پرسیارەکەم بوو
کاتفرات قابورە بەڕسبوون دەمەوێت ڕوونکردنەوە نمونەک بنەوە. ئێمە وەکو هەرێمی کوردستان نمونەک دەمەوێت من وەکو خۆم توانام هەیە ئەوەی بەرزکەمەوە، بەڵام دەبی ئەو مێزەی بەرزکەمەوە. من ناتوانم ئەو مێزەی بەرزکەمەوە کە بێ بەرزی کەمەوە یان ئەوتە پشتم دەشێ یان بەسە خۆم پێ یان پێم برن ناکرێ. دەمەوێت ئەو بەڕێزانە لە وەکو نمونەک بهێنمەوە. من ئەلێرە پێویستمەوە ئەوەی بەرزکەمەوە. جیرانەکەم هەیە کە نەتەوە یەکگرتوەکان وەکو جیران کە یارمەتیم بدا. نیوزیلەندا و هاوشێوەکانی وەکو چەند کەسێک تێدەپەڕن لە ڕووی ئینسانیەوە کە پێویستمان بەوەی کە یارمەتیم بداتن. دوو هاوڕێشێ ئەم خلاص دەبم. دوو هاوڕێش هەیە، یەکیان قونسڵە، یەکیان جەنابی باڵێزە. جەنابی قونسڵ و جیرانەکە و ئەوەی کە نیوزیلەندا هاوکاریەکان ئەوەندەیە توانیان یارمەتی مەدەن مێزەکە مەترێک بینە پێش. بەڵام جەنابی باڵێز کرێنێکی هەیە، زۆر بە ئاسانی دەتوانی یارمەتیمان بداتن مێزەکەی بەرزکردن. پرسیارەکەم لە بۆ جەنابی باڵێزی ئەمریکاوەیە، ئەوان کرێنەکە سلفیان لێدا ئیشان پێکردیە، کەی کرێنەکە دەینە پێش یارمەتیەکەی زیاتر بکەن بۆ ئەوی بتوانین مێزەکەی بگەینە شوێنی مەبەست.
زۆر سپاس. بە درێژی پرسیارەکەت کردە کرا کورتێکەوە بە زۆر سپاس.
Thank you very much for a great panel. Alexander Kravitz from Insight. Question first to Ambassador Dobson. Question first to Ambassador Dobson. You mentioned about youth and women. Does New Zealand have a scholarship program for Iraqi women for college in New Zealand? That's the first question. And to Ambassador Tuller, does the U.S., as part of this assistance program, is the U.S. offering riot control assistance and training to the Iraqi security forces? And if not, would it be amenable to such a request from the Iraqi government?
Sweet.
Thank you.
40 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you.
كاك محمد خليل دوا دقر مولايوان دوا دي مولاتان بسرتها.
شكرا. أنا كقايمقان سنجار كمستشار الإقليم كردستان في برلمان إقليم كردستان للشؤون اليزيدية. بالحقيقة اليوم الشعب العراقي يريد الحياة ولا بد أن يستجيب. خدمات، منادات، نحن كل معه. لكن اليوم نحن مع تطبيق الدستور العراقي. لو الدستور مطبق ما وصلنا إلى هذا المرحلة. شكرا للولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، ساعد الشعب العراقي في 3 مراحل مهمة وحساسة: سقوط النظام الدكتاتوري، بناء الدستور، محاربة الداعش. سؤالي إلى سعادة السفير الأمريكي: هل إذا لا سامح الله جمدت الدستور أو غيرت الدستور أو عدلت الدستور، هل حقوق الأقليات مسانة كما ينبغي؟ نحن لدينا تخوف من هذا المرحلة الحساسة، وخاصة نحن اليزيديين دفعنا ضريبة الكبرى في محاربة الداعش ومجيء الداعش، وبجهود حثيثة ثبتت ولأول مرة في وثيقة في الدولة العراقية حقوق الديانة اليزيدية من قبل فخامة رئيس مسعود البرزاني والقوى السياسية الكردية.
بالثانية تردد.
نعم. النقطة الثانية أنا طالب السفير الأمريكي، المرحلة الرابعة هو بناء الدولة العراقية الحديثة واستقرار العلاقة بهم. ما بإمكان الولايات المتحدة تضغط على البنك الدولي والقرارات الاقتصادية العالمية والدول العشرين الاقتصادية. مشكلتنا العراق في الأساس عدم تطبيق الدستور وعدم إدارة المال. النقطة لا المهم إدارة المال ومجيء المال. نحن بحاجة إلى دعم الشعب العراقي. شكرا.
I will come back to you to answer these questions, and I'll come back to the audience. Matt, I think most of the questions are for you. Nothing surprising about that. So if you can be brief in order that we take more.
Well, of course, a number of questions embedded, but let me first speak about the Constitution, since a number mentioned that, of course, and we all, and I would say I agree. The U.S. is not simply a bystander or disinterested. Not only, of course, do we have tremendous interest in seeing Iraq as a successful, prosperous, stable state, but I think there is a moral obligation that the U.S. has also to assist Iraq and the Iraqi people in that, and that's been a consistent theme. So we're not simply standing by and watching what happens. At the same time, what we need to do is, I think, and of course, since we played an important part in helping the Iraqi people to birth the Constitution, is first to recognize that no Constitution is perfect. Every Constitution has to have a mechanism to evolve, to change, to do that, and that's a conversation that Iraqis are having and should have. Going back to the protesters, I see what's happening with the protest is, in some respects, a very, very healthy thing. Because there has been an absence for some time now of a mechanism for the political leaders to have the messages that of what the people need and what they want. And in fact, what's happening right now, those messages are being conveyed very, very clearly. The question now is, are those political leaders awakening and coming to the dawning realization that much of the problems that the protesters are calling attention to are a product of the actions or inactions of the political leaders themselves. I see some evidence that that's happening. It never happens fully. It never happens as much as some might like. But in fact, I am sensing that there is, and you refer to the fact that there are those who are saying they want reform. Now, people don't want reform to give up their own power, but there is a dialogue that's beginning, and I think it's in all of our interest to see that continue to take place. With respect to the U.S. and whether we are providing any assistance specifically to riot control or others, under the international coalition, there are elements from some of the countries, Italy, and others that do and have been providing ongoing support to law enforcement. There hasn't, since the creation earlier in October of an Iraqi government attempt to respond and build up a force that has that. I don't believe that has quite come to fruition yet, but certainly requests from the Iraqi government and under the framework of whether through the coalition or the U.S.-Iraqi strategic framework, which provides mechanisms for cooperation on that upon a mutual agreement, yes, then I think we would be prepared to. And we recognize that currently now many of the deaths, at least, and injuries are occurring because of poor training, poor command and control, poor methodologies being used by those on the security side. I'm not sure that I feel myself that certainly if I were to make a list of the things that I think might help to take this current crisis and out of this crisis seize opportunities, I don't know that I would put amending the Constitution in the top 3 or 4 or 5 list of things that might need to happen. I think there are some more immediate concerns, but certainly amending the Constitution, and we all understand why that creates some concerns, understandably. The Constitution that Iraqis have developed does provide many, many protections for the different components of the country, for minorities. It has a power-sharing arrangement in it, and if ultimately the decisions are that the Constitution should be amended, there's a mechanism doing that. What would I personally put at near the top of the issue? One, I think, of course, if you listen to what really began much of this, is a sense that the Iraqi wealth is being squandered for the benefit of the few, and that the many are not receiving the benefits of the resources of the state in terms of creating jobs, opportunities, housing. And I think unless you begin right there with that, then you're bypassing what is fundamentally the cause of the immediate crisis. You need to diffuse that, make steps in that direction. I might put as a second order of priority the fact that the electoral law is perhaps responsible in some respects for creating political parties that are quarantined away from constituents, from the people. And that is a product, and of course, Alice, particularly what we all saw in terms of poor turnout. Why would people go out and vote if they feel that their vote doesn't make any difference in a system where either those political parties steal the vote or simply elect the same people or select the candidates? But yes, constitutional reform can be part of the discussion, but I would hope that there are some other issues that receive higher prioritization.
Thank you for that. Alice, do you want to quickly come in on any of these points, or shall I take more questions?
No, I'm happy for more questions. I'm always keen on questions.
Okay, I'll come to Munah Khan first, then I will cross.
And then you'll pick a female questioner, perhaps.
Yeah, we will have. Okay, just یک دقيقة تخوة. Go ahead.
I just wanted to answer the question on education. Very simply put, there is not a specific scholarship program in Iraq right now for women. Of course, there are a number of scholarships available to international women in New Zealand, taken up by our institutions, and I'm very proud that every year there are a small number of Iraqi people and Iraqi women who go to New Zealand to study. What I would say is I don't think that's the most efficient way of supporting education for Iraqi women at the moment. Instead, what we have done with our stabilization funding in Iraq is focus that on women and girls here in Iraq and in the areas where it's needed most. So we have been supporting, for example, Mosul University and a number of other institutions up in West Anbar and other areas, particularly focused on education for women and girls.
Thank you for that.
پرسیاری من بەڕێز بالیۆزی ئەمریکا لە ڕاستیدا کە ئەو خۆپیشاندەرانە کە ئێستا ئەنجام دەدرێتن لە بەغدا هۆیەکە لە هۆیەکانی جێبەجێنەکردنی دەستوری بە هەموو مادەکانەوە. ئایا ئەوەی کە ئێستا خۆپیشاندەران داوا دەکە هەموارکردنی دەستوری یاخود هەموارکردنی یاسای هەڵبژاردننی ئەنجومەنی عێراقدا ئەوە ڕێگە چارەیەکە بۆ خۆپیشاندەران بۆ ئەوەی جاواکاریەکانیان جێبەجێ بکرێتن ئەوە پرسیارەکە. پرسیاری دووەم ئەگەر هاتو هەڵبژاردننی پێشوەختە ئەنجامدرا هەر بە گومان ئەو حزبانەیە کە دیسان خۆیان کاندید دەکەن دێنە ناو ئەنجومەنی نوێنەرانی عێراقدا واتە هیچ گۆڕانکاریەک لە ناو سیاسەتی ئەنجومەنی عێراقدا و لە ناو عێراقیشدا ڕوونەداتن. ئەوە باشتر ئەوەیە کەوا بە باشترین شێواز کەوە دەستور بە شێوازێکی داڕژراوە کە لەلایەن کۆمەلگای عێراقەوە دەنگی پێدراوە پەسەند کراوە جێبەجێکردنی مادەکان لە بەرژەوەندی سەرجەم هاوڵاتیانی عێراقدایە. وە پرسیاری سەیەم ئەوەی ئێمە لە هەرێمی کوردستان کە لە ساڵی 2017 کە ڕفراندۆمان ئەنجامدا زۆربەی وڵاتان نیگەران بوون لەوەی کەوا هەرێمی کوردستان داوای ڕفراندۆمیان کردووە بۆ جیابوونەوەی لە عێراقدا. ئێمە لێرەدا پرسیار دەکەین عێراق بەرەو ئاڵۆزی دەڕواتن، عێراق بەرەو ئایندەیەکی نادیار دەڕواتن. ئایا لێرەدا عێراق بە شێوازێکی سیاسەتێکی بکاتن کەوا یەکسانی بپارێزێت لە نێوان هەرێمی کوردستان و عێراقدا؟ ئێمەی هەرێمی کوردستان لە ناو دەستوردا مافەکانمان پارێزراوە بەڵام دەستور بە هیچ شێوازێک مادەکان جێبەجێ ناکرێتن چ لە بەرژەوەندی کۆمەلگای عێراق چ لە بەرژەوەندی هەرێمی کوردستان. بۆیە هیواخوازم ئەو وڵامانەی بەدەستمان بکەوێتن تاکو ئێمە هەم وەکو نوێنەری خەڵکی کوردستان هەم وەکو هەرێمی کوردستان بتوانین وڵامی ڕاستە و خۆ ڕاستەقینە لامان هەبێتن پەیامی خۆمان بگەینێ و زۆر سوپاس.
زۆر سپاس. ئەو خانمێ لە دوای تو دێمە لای توش ئەو دوایە جەنابتی.
سپاس دەستان خۆش بی. پێویستە پرسیارێکی جدی بکەین بۆ خەڵک لەسەر شەقامە لە بەغدا. طبعاً جوابەکەی ئەوەیە چونکە خەڵک برسیە کارەبای نییە، ئاوی نییە، خەدەماتی نییە. باشە پرسیارە چیکە بۆچی ئاو نییە بۆچی کارەبا نییە بۆچی خەدەمات نییە طبعا هۆکاریدی لە پشتەوەیە فەساد هەیە و ئیدارە باش نەبووە و تا دوایی و بۆچی ئەوانە باش نەبووینە بۆچی فەساد هەیە من بەر لە 4 ساڵ بەحسێکم هەبوو لە یەکێک لە زانکۆکانی دهۆک تەقدیمم کرد لەسەر حەلی سراع لە عێراق conflict resolution لەوێ بابەتێکم ئیسارە کرد پێم وایە ئێستا کاتیتی ئەم مەسەلەیە ئاماژە پێ بکەینەوە و بەجددیش ئێستا خەڵکێک لە جنوب لێرەیە خەڵکێک لە ناوەندی عراق لێرەیە خەڵکێک لە هەرێم لێرەیە بیانیەکان دۆستەکانمان لێرن بەجددی ومێت دەکەم ئەگەر لەگەڵ ڕێیەکەی منن یان دژن حەزەکەم ئەو پرسیارە بۆ هەموو بەڕێزانبی و بیری لێ بکەینەوە من لە بەحسەکەم بۆم دەرکەوت لە عێراق سیراعی حەڵقەی سیراع بازنەی سیراع زۆر گەورەیە هەموو لەگەڵ هەمووان لە سیراعن واتە شیعە لەگەڵ شیعە شیعە لەگەڵ سونە شیعە و سونە لەگەڵ کورد کوردیش لەگەڵ خۆی بەڵام حەڵقەی سیراعی کورد لەگەڵ کورد بچووکترە چونکە لە چوارچێوەی هەرێمی کوردستان لەگەڵ یەکتر سیراع دەکەن بۆیە من پێشنیار دەکەم ئێستا کاتی ئەوە هاتووە ئیعادەی تشکیلەی دەوڵەتی عێراق بکرێت لەسەر ئەساسی کۆمەڵک فیدرالی بۆی سراعەکان سنووری حەڵقەکان سنووردار ببی شیعە لەگەڵ شیعە سراع بکات سونە لەگەڵ سونە ئیدی ئەو دەمای کۆنتڕۆلی ئاسانترە ئیستقراریش سەریعتر دێتن بۆ عێراق ئەگەر لەگەڵ ڕێی منن ئەوە حەزەکەم ڕێیەکەم بزانم
ئەو مایکرۆفۆنەکە بدەی ئەو خانمەی لە پێش خۆت جەنابتە
بێگومان دەستخۆشی زۆرم هەیە ماندوو نەبن دەستخۆشێکم بە شێوەیەکی گشتی و دەستخۆشێکی تایبەتیشم هەیە بۆ سەرۆکۆزیرانی نیوزیلەندا چونکە جاسنیدا بەڕاستی نمونەی کەسێکی حەکیم و دانا و سەرکەوتوو بوو ئەوەی کە ئێمە بینیمان هێندەی لە ئاگامان لێبێ لە ڕووداوەکەی مزگەوتی نور بەڕاستی دەورێکی زۆر حەکیمە ئەنەی بینیەوە دەورێکی زۆر ئیجابی بینی و نمونەیەک بوو لە ئافرەتی سەرکەوتوو و دانا ئەوە بۆ هەموو ئافرەتان مایشە نازیە من بەنسبەت بەڕاستی نەتەوە یەکگرتوەکان نێردەی نەتەوە یەکگرتوەکان و نوێنەری قنسوڵی ئەمریکا شتێکم هەیە یعنی من کاتێک کە شتەکان تەمان بۆ ئەوان پرسیارە لە دوای دەستخۆشیم بۆ ئەوان پرسیارە بەڵێ پرسیارەکە ئەوەیە هەمیشە تەمان خەڵکی عراق کە خۆپیشان دەکات تەواوی تەواو 100% حەقی خۆیەتی مافی خۆیەتی چونکە ئەو پێویستیانەی ئەو هەمووی لە جێگای خۆیەتی کاتێکە شتێک بەنسبەت ئەوانەوە دەبێت ئەگەر ویستیان زۆر دەچنە پێش لێ تەنانەت بەشداری دانیشتەکان دەکەن ئەگەر نەیان ویست دوور بە دوور دەڵێن ئەوە ئیشی ئێمە نیە ئەوە پێویستی بە ئێمە نیە ئێمە بینیمان بەڕاستی کاتێکە نوێنەری نەتەوە یەکگرتوەکان چۆن ناو خۆپیشاندەران ئەسڵەن ینی قبوڵیان نەکرد لە ناویان من هەر بە حاڵ دەرچوون لە ناویان لەبەرەوە ئەمە شتێک بە ئێمە دەڵێ پرسیاری ئەوە جوابی ئەوە بدەنەوە ئێمە شتێکی عام بە ئێمە نەڵێن چونکە ئێمە کە ئێستا کە ئەوان لێرن چاوەڕوانی ئەوە بووین شتێکی بەرچاوڕوونترمان بدەنێ لەسەر ئەم بابەتانە
دەست خۆش بی ئەو خانمەی تەنیشتت بەس بە پرسیار زەحمەت دێمەدە
دەستان خۆشببی من پرسیارەکەم ئەوەیە کە خۆپیشاندەران هەموو ڕێکخراوەکانی کە لێرەنە دەلێن ئەمە دژی تونند و تیژینە ئایا UN پرسیاری کردیە لە خۆ کە تەرەفی سێم هەیە لە پشت ئەو تونند و تیژیەیە چ لێکۆلینەوەیە کرایە چ تونند و تیژە دەکرێت ئایا وەزارەتی ناوخۆ بەرگری عێراق بەرپرسە ئەگە بەرپرسە لۆ ئیجراءات وەرناگرن و باسی دەستور دەکرێت کە تعدیل بکرێ یان ئەگەر دەستور عێراق پێویستی بە تعدیلکردنیان بە تەطبیقکردنە و بەڕێی منیش ئێستا کاتی تەقسیمی عێراقاتیەوە زۆر سوپاس
زۆر باش ئەو خانمەی پشتەوە بەسەر چاپ دێمە لای جەنابیشت ئەمر دەکەی کاکسەرم
Thank you so much for this very important panel. Coming direct from Tahrir Square, from Baghdad to Erbil, I just wanted to highlight some important points. One of them, all of you talking about the protest as a protest. Yes, started as a protest. We have an Iraqi revolution. Iraqi revolution, people of Iraq, they are refusing to have any national dialogue with the political elites. This is very important points that you need to know. Secondly, the position of United Nations. I belong to the generation embargo and also what's happened. The Security Council, they can issue some resolution. I still remember 1991, resolution after resolution. The mass killing now of Iraqi people, the peaceful protest. Where is the position of the international community? The American occupation was under the umbrella of protecting human rights. Now the paramilitary groups, they are trying to suppress this demonstration.
Okay.
And please, just let me, this is the message of the...
I can't let you more, so please give us a question.
Okay. The American people, they have the moral responsibility, not bringing your tank, Your Excellency, but you have the moral responsibility to protect the human rights, the government and also the paramilitary groups. Those people, they are kidnapping and also torturing. You know, we met with many people whom they freed by the Iraqi intelligence. They tortured the activists exactly like Daesh they did. So we need to name those groups, because those groups they are part of the political process. Thank you.
Our chief protest correspondent, Kakiwa.
Thank you. Thank you. Very great, eye-opening 3 presentations. I think we know where everyone is now. 2 questions or comments, actually 3, one for each, if you don't mind. Mr. Ambassador, as we look at the scene in Baghdad, we are seeing 2 camps on the government, on the authority side. A moderate, very powerless camp that says we are not killing protesters, we are looking for a peaceful solution for this, we are looking to meet their demands. And the holders of the guns who are killing, who are gassing, who are dealing with the protesters as terrorists. Yesterday's events were very worrying. We saw a meeting of the Security Committee in the presence of the Speaker of Parliament, the head of the judiciary in one meeting, as if they were subordinates to the Prime Minister, and in the presence of Mubahed al-Muhandis, one of the most extreme hardlines. There is a serious fear that a coup or a coup d'etat might take place by the hardliners, by those who are killing protesters as we speak, by those who are protecting this system. And this coup is masterminded. Looking at General Qasem Soleimani's moves over the last week, all indications point to the direction of the hardliners and the radicals who hate America, who hate the protesters, who don't want the UN to be involved, who don't want to see any Western and foreign or outside involvement in Iran.
Second question, Kakiwa.
That could take place. There's a serious fear. What is the US position, or are you considering this possibility, and what would you do should this take place? My second comment to Your Excellency, the New Zealand Ambassador, I think there's a great story of success in New Zealand that you can educate the Iraqis about. I was watching a clip of your Prime Minister yesterday or a few days ago. She gave in 2.5 seconds or more a very long list of achievements. I think each one of these achievements makes a great story to sell to the people of Iraq, to show the people of Iraq this is what governance. My last comment on the UN, I will just echo what you said. Jeanine is doing a great job. She came to Tahrir. We believe she will change after Sergio Di Mello, God bless his soul. I think Jeanine is the first SRSG who bulldozed her way through the political scene. We hope that she is supported by the right team on the UN side and on the Iraqi side as well. Thank you.
كاك هوجر آخر دانا أو زاد ديمولاتان بسرچا وكاك دارا أمر ذكي
زۆر سپاس من دوو پرسیارم هەیە یەکەم بۆ نوێنەری نەتەوەی گرتووەکانە پرسیارەکەم ئەوەیە کە کاتێک دەوڵەت یا ئەوانەی بە ناوی دەوڵەت خەڵکی سیڤیل دەکوژن نەتەوەی گرتووەکان هەر لە چوارچێوەی سیادە و کارە دیبلۆماسیەکەی دەمێنێتەوە ئەو مەسئولیەتە قانونی ئەخلاقیەی لەسەرەتی چۆن ئەدائی دەکا لە بەرامبەر دەوڵەت کە کاتێک خەڵکی سیڤیل دەکوژی ئەمە بۆ نەتەوەی گرتووەکان بۆ جەنابی سەفیری ئەمریکا ئایا پەیوانیە ئەو بارودۆخەی لە عێراق گوزەر دەکا بەشێکی پەیوەستە بە ملبەملانەی ئێران ئەمریکا لە مەنتقەکە سوپاس
زۆر باشە کاکسەر و کاکداراژ وەردەگرم دوایەوە کۆتایی پێدەینین وەڵا دەزانم ئەت باوەڕ کە خەڵکی تریش زۆر دەستی بات بەرز کردێ ئەمر دەکەیت جەنابیشتە دەمر دەکەیت
Thank you very much. Kak Farhad, thank you for your great and important panel. That's international support for a state built in Iraq. My question is concerning the address of our panel, and my question is to Ms. Alice from UN. I ask Ms. Alice, first, we like contractors, I am the head of union contractors in Kurdistan. We thank UN. Before 20 years, they had helped us and they had supported us. They had executed under the decision of 986 many projects concerning the infrastructure projects in the sectors of health and education. Because, just we had out from and breath from the past regime. The question, before 20 years, your activity was very well. You had helped us. And now, after 20 years, your level is very down. No support for the area, and our panel's address is supporting to the area. Especially, we have crisis of economy. We have many buildings of health centers and schools. It stopped. Can you answer me
Thank you, Dr. Farhad, for this interesting panel. And thanks, MERI, for inviting us for this interesting session. And I would like to ask the panelists, the excellencies, the panelists, starting from His Excellency, the Ambassador of the United States in Iraq, and the United Nations, and the New Zealand Ambassador, and all of them, they are in a good position to report on Iraq. But I would ask them one question. Well, I have seen them always, they say, we wish to see, we are delighted to see, and I didn't see, and they say we have an obligation to help the Iraqi people. I know there is an Iraqi-American treaty or agreement on building a state in Iraq. So I would ask them, instead of wishing to see, can you change your position into engagement with a very strategic plot to bring about in Iraq a government, a federal government of Iraq, with everybody will be secure of his income, of his life, and also for the economic reforms in Iraq. Thank you very much.
You answer the questions, and we don't have much time, only 10 minutes. Because the hour is signaling to me. So please take your time to answer whatever.
Thank you.
All the questions that was
quite a number of questions, and I apologize. I don't know the names of all the questioners, but I did try to sort of organize a few things. With respect to the Constitution, I may well be wrong in my opinion that constitutional reform is a lower priority than some other things. It's simply my opinion, and frankly, my opinion is that of a friend of Iraq but an outsider, and my opinion really counts nothing with respect to the opinion of the Iraqi people. So I do welcome that discussion is taking place. Of course, there are a number of questions regarding the violence, who's responsible, what can we do to deal with that, and this really does concern all of us. And of course, I would not dispute that people need to be alert to the dangers, that in these opportunities like this, while there may be some positive opportunities, some things that can be, there's also great danger, and we've seen this, of course, previously here in the region, where the expectations, hopes of change that young people or others begin are then lost as those with the guns, those with the malign intent, those who will not give up power, hijack the process. And of course, I think we all need to be alert to that. That rests very much in the hands of perhaps what you described as those moderates amongst the political leaders and I believe there are many, and they're alert to that intent. But I'd go back, and I think I'm safe in quoting my own Secretary of State, who in a tweet last night said that what's happening in Iraq and Lebanon is really that people want their countries for themselves, and the notion of watan and what that means. And if there are symbols right now of what's emerging from the protest in Baghdad, it's the Iraqi flag, and then of course the tuk-tuk. But this is what really is this is Iraq that this is happening. And I reject entirely as just almost farcical any notion that any outside party is behind this. These are Iraqis who are doing this. These are Iraqis who are saying now is the time for us to take this back in our hand. Secretary in his tweet goes on to say that, of course, people are in Iraq and Lebanon that are discovering that the main export of the Iranian regime is corruption disguised as revolution. And the people of Iraq and Lebanon deserve much, much better and more than that. I do not disagree that we have, in addition to the interest here, a moral obligation, and the United States very, very much cares about what's happening here and will be involved. I mentioned briefly the strategic framework agreement that we have, and of course, but I, in the interest of time, I could go through the number of things under all of the provisions of that agreement, whether it's the political and diplomatic, the economic, energy, education, cultural exchange, law enforcement, health, environment, under all of those, and we have devoted significant amounts of resources, and particularly working very closely with the UN and other partners in addressing the needs of those areas that were liberated from the devastation of ISIS, the destruction of infrastructure, the displacement of persons, and just over the last 4 years, more than $2.4 billion from the U.S. has been devoted specifically to that task, working with that. I know I don't want to take more time on that, but I do assure you, you're absolutely right. This is not about wishing something. This is about doing, about being engaged and delivering things. So thank you for the question.
Alice?
So I think I was really interested in there were lots of comments as well as questions, and I was very interested in the comments that were made, and I've noted a lot of those. I think in terms of, because we don't have much time, I'm going to focus on three things in my responses. The first of that was the reference to elections. And as I say, there's a draft electoral law that is out there. I think the key to the electoral process in Iraq is two things. It is that the electorate feel that their members of parliament truly represent them, and that they are accountable, and that they're accessible. And I think, you know, we look at other countries in the world. There are lots of different structures, parliamentary structures, but the key to the ones that are successful are the ones that bring the members of parliament very close to the people that they represent. And our advice here is to try and help whatever legislation is agreed to enable a process that makes members of parliament accessible and accountable, and I think that's the absolute key. A number of people raised the issue of violence in the protests. The United Nations, as you will know, produced a report at the end of the first wave of protests that spoke quite fiercely and very openly and very honestly about the need for accountability for the violence that had taken place in that first wave of protests, but also made a number of recommendations about how the security forces should be enabling people to protest peacefully and how that might function. And at the beginning of the second round of protests, and I speak as someone who lives actually very close to Tahrir Square, so I can hear the protests 24 hours a day, every day. I can also hear the firing of the tear gas canisters, the tracer bullets. I can hear all of it, all of the time. At the beginning of the second wave of protests, we were very pleased to see that the protests were being managed in a way that was much more mature by the security forces, and we felt that some of the recommendations we had made were listened to. And that's what makes the events of the last 2 or 3 days so distressing and so disappointing, because we've seen a reversion to or a moving towards a very different set of tactics. We issued our second human rights report last night on the protests and the handling of the protests by the security forces. And you will see again, we are extremely critical of the way that this is being handled. There is absolutely no justification for the levels of violence that have been seen. And I would just say in parentheses, in the preparation of our reports, we draw entirely on first-hand accounts. And I think, which means that you can have absolute confidence in what it is we are reporting. And then the third and last point I would like to make, a number of people, I heard you inviting us, the United Nations, to engage more. You know this, of course, but I think it's worth saying it again. We are very active here in Iraq, and a very small percentage of what we do and say, rightly, makes it into the public domain. We distribute statements publicly, and you see on the panoply of digital media here, when the government hasn't closed it down, that we are doing all sorts of things. But of course, behind that, we have, for example, throughout the last month, been meeting many groups of protesters and others who are working closely with the protesters, speaking to parliamentarians who are sitting in the parliament, talking to members of parliament who are seeking to a solution to the problems. It's not appropriate that we publicize all of those activities, but we are extremely active, and I hope you will credit us that we're not simply sitting by and listening and not doing anything. And then there was a specific criticism about our low level of support in terms of development. And I think it's very important to make a point here, and I hope you'll excuse me for being rather blunt about this. Iraq is a middle-income country making somewhere around about $2 billion a week, depending on the price of a barrel of oil. The UN agencies, funds and programs, pretty much all of which are here in Iraq, and pretty much all of which have major programs here in Iraq, are dependent on donors. And there is a tremendous appetite among the international donor community to help rebuild the country after the liberation from ISIL. But in terms of long-term sustainable development, long-term economic development, the donors are not going to fund. They're not going to fund that. There is not an appetite for that. There needs to be a much better use of your $2 billion a week in development that comes from Iraq itself. And then, of course, the international community is extremely keen to help you to effect that. Thank you.
Thank you. Shadid, but quickly, please, because we are really running out of time.
Just two things I want to say in response. I represent a country that does not have a written constitution. It's not a federal state. What it does have is mandatory seats in its parliament for its Indigenous people, the community that I come from. What that says to me is that a political system is successful when it reflects the communities that it represents. So it's not for New Zealand or any other country to tell Iraq what kind of political system it should have or to impose that system on it. What our job is to make sure that the leaders of this country and the people of Iraq have the resources it needs to access the advice and assistance it gets from the UN and from all of the partners that it has to ensure it is able to deliver a political system that represents the people of Iraq. For those that have mentioned our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, I would just say she is a product of what happens when you allow young people, and specifically young women, to get involved in political systems. The Prime Minister started her political career as a teenager, and that has been her entire career. So I encourage all of you to ensure that your young people and your young women in particular have a voice in Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take just three 1 minute, because they have been this two here and that gentleman over there, and that's it. But please, 1 minute. یک دقة. أمريكا.
زۆر سپاس بەیانی نەوزاد پۆڵ سەرۆکی دەستگای سورایە بۆ ڕۆشنبیر و ڕاگەیاندن ئێمە لەو کە بەشداری میری بکەین میری هەموو پێکاتەکانە ئەکید دیداری میری مەبەستمەوەیە کە بەیانی ئەوڕۆ هەبووی بە سەفارەی ئەمریکا و حکوومەتی ئەمریکی مووقفی لە مستەقبەلی عێراق بوو ئایا ئەمریکا پێی باشە بۆ ئایندە ئەگەر گۆڕانکاری هەبی نیزامەکی فیدرالی هەبی یا نیزامەکی شمولی و نقطەی دووەم
بەس
نقطەی
باوەڕ بکە کاتمان نەما
ئەقەلیاتە بەس ئەقەلیات ئایا مناطقی دەشتینەینەوە و سنجار پێویستی بە دەعمی دووەلی هەیە چی بۆ ئایندە بۆ ئەوانە دەکرێت
زۆر سپاس ئەو برادەرەی تەنیشتت
زۆر سپاس پارێزەر حەمدی بەرواری بەرپرسیارێکی کراوە مافی مەربی کوردستانی دۆکی من دوو پرسیار هەنا هیویدارین بەرسەوە هەردوو پرسیارە بێدەدانێ ئێک ئەوە ئەمید بینین کە ئەف تاوانین بەغدا و العجوێری عێراق تێنە ئەنجام دانێ جێر بن چاودێریە نەتەوین ئێگرتی و دەولەتن زلهێز ئایا دەولەتن زلهێز و نەتەوین ئێگرتی کەنگی پرۆلی خۆ رابن ji دەورێ نەعامێ رابن دەوری خەلەیەک ئەvە پرسیارێکی پرسیارە دوێ کە گرێدایە پەمی هەوڵاتیە مافهەمی هەوڵاتیە ئایا وەختی هەوڵاتی سەردانە وان سەفارەتات کەن و قۆنسولیاتات کەن هیویدارین بشێوەیەکی مرۆڤایەتی کار گەلبێتەکردن
زۆر سپاس ئەو برادەرەش لەوێ یەک دقە
زۆر سپاس بەیاد عەلی ئەندامی بۆردی توێژینەوەی دەستگای ستاندەر و سەرۆکی پەیمانگای پلانی استراتیژی بۆ پرسی دیپلۆماسی ئێمە دەزانین لە دوای 2003ەوە ئەمریکا هات وەچ پیاوان سینیەکی زێڕی تەقدیمی ئێران کرد و ئەو وەزعش هەتا ئێستا وا باردۆخەنا هەموارە دەڕواتن من مانجی ڕابردوو لە وەزارەی خارجی دعوت کرا من لە وەزارەتی خارجی دعوت کرا مانجی ڕابردوو زۆرمان هەوڵدا ئێمە پرسیارەکەمان ئەوەیە ئایا ئەمریکای بەڕێز تاکەی ئەو وەزعە ئەو بارودۆخەی کوردستانیش و هەرێمیش ئەو وەزعی کە لە بەغدا ڕوو دەدا وەزعی سیاسیە برسیەتی و تێنوێتی و بێکاری و ئەوشتانە لە وەزعی سیاسی ئەو ئەنجامانە دروست
زۆر سپاس
تکە وەڵاممان
داوای لێبوردن لێ دەکەم چونکە بەس گوتم سێ I want you 1 minute if you want to answer these questions and your closing remarks.
The U.S. doesn't have any particular preferred system for Iraq. It's for Iraqis to decide what their system is and to determine that. With respect to the Nineveh Plain, we have devoted a significant amount of resources just over the last year, $400 million, to try to recreate the infrastructure conditions so that displaced persons can return to their homes there. I respect, of course, many visitors who come to our embassies and consulates, probably the largest number of those who come for consular services, visas. We attach the highest importance to making sure that we deal with all applicants for visas, passports, other consular services, with not only a high degree of professionalism, with a high degree of respect. If anybody ever experiences anything differently, I would want to hear about it personally, as would our Consul General here in Erbil, Steve Fagan, who's with us today. And then, of course, we're all concerned and will continue to watch what we see happening in Baghdad. And I'm not sure where this is. None of us has a crystal ball as to where this will lead. But again, I hope that it's the opportunity for the Iraqi leaders to seize opportunities from what's happening.
Here, Alice.
really just to echo what, I didn't think I would ever hear myself saying just to echo what the US ambassador has said, but of course, yes, we're very keen. We've had a steady stream of protesters visiting us. We've been visiting them. We're always very welcoming. We're always very keen to engage with everybody. One of the particular opportunities that the United Nations has that many others in the international community in this country don't have is our ability to travel all over the country. I've been, I think, in all but 2 of the governorates of Iraq over the last 18 months to 2 years. We like to get out and meet people, and we like to welcome people and have a conversation with them. The dialogue that we have with all the sectors of the Iraqi public is immensely valuable to us.
Thank you. Trudy.
Just to finish by saying, I knew before I came here that the needs of Iraq were complex. The last 2 weeks have taught me that they are more complex than I can possibly understand. But just to say, I think this is a country that is determined to find a path forward. What people want is prosperity, they want safety, they want security. That's no different to what the people of New Zealand or anywhere else in the world wants and demands. To get there, my hope for this country is that in the coming days and weeks, a peaceful path forward can be found. We don't want to see any more of the violence that we've seen in the last few weeks. I really ask all of you who will go back to Baghdad and go further south to join protesters to remember that we don't need any further violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. سپاسێکی زۆر بۆ هەموو لایەکتان بۆ ئامادەبوونتان و داوای لە بڕنیش دەکەین ئەگەر نەمانتوانی هەموو پرسیارەکان وەگرین لەبەر نەبوونی کات و سپاسی پانەلیستەکان دەکەین بۆ گوزاریکردنیان